Good morning, everyone. How's everyone this morning? Yeah, awesome. My name is Anthony Van Gemert, and I'm here today to talk to you about cold data storage and Stretch database. So before we kick off, these lights are awfully bright, but before we kick off, I see there's a nice crowd out here today. Who has cold data storage problems? Anyone, Rach? Show of hands. Ah, good, awesome. So who's heard of Stretch database? Anyone? Fantastic. So before we kick these off, my colleagues and I, we normally kind of ask the audience, just a few people in the audience, to give us an idea of what sort of table sizes they're dealing with in their cold data. And we've had answers that range from, say, 300 and something billion rows to, we had one customer who's 1.3 trillion rows, admittedly in a partition table. But there's a significant amount of data and significant amount of data to try and manage and keep active. So just anybody, is there anyone here who can tell us about a particular table that has been giving them issues, something that is keeping them up at night? Anyone? Anyone beat 300 billion? Anyone beat 1.3 trillion? Come on, there's got to be. You wouldn't all be here otherwise. Okay, well let me get kicked off. So today, obviously, I want to tell you about Stretch database. Just kind of give you an overview of what Stretch database is. It has been out since the release of SQL Server 2016. So I want to give you sort of an overview of Stretch database, and kind of we'll go through a demo to show how it works. And we'll do kind of a sort of a scenario demo. So I have an assistant here today who's going to help me with that. Obviously, we'll go through how Stretch works and how easily it works and how we've managed to, the idea is that it's going to be as easy as possible to use. And then hopefully, you get an idea from this session of what can Stretch do for you? How can you use Stretch in your normal daily work lives? And it's working, awesome. So yeah, now Stretch is a hybrid. I mean, it's a quintessential hybrid product. It's integral part of SQL Server 2016, obviously, and it's part of Azure. So it is a hybrid, quintessential hybrid product. This is something that we really want our customers to know. So, the takeaway, and we'll repeat these when I leave, is just kind of what can it do for me? What are the benefits? And how is Microsoft looking at hybrid technology? So what do we mean by hybrid? So hybrid means a lot of things to a lot of different people. When I think of hybrid, I think of, a whole bunch of technologies, bringing a whole bunch of technologies together and working with my on-premise environment. Something that is, there's no obvious difference between the two systems, they just work. Our customers, obviously they see hybrid as, well, I've got a whole bunch, I've got this a huge on-premise network, huge, complex infrastructure. I want to move that to the cloud, but kind of retain control over that infrastructure myself. Obviously, I want to save money because on-premise infrastructure it's expensive. So when I talk to my parents, this is what they think of as hybrid. Which, yeah, and it's true. It's true. They have no idea what I do. And then when I talk to my friends and I say, look, I work on hybrid products for Microsoft. So the immediate thing is, so yeah, joining this stuff together. Well, she's cute, isn't she? But what we think about as hybrid aside, I mean, hybrid is here and it's now. I mean, we have the products, we have these hybrid products that are fully supporting our customers today. With SQL Server Stretch database, so SQL Server 2016 with Stretch database, and Azure, it essentially makes hybrid as simple as it gets. I mean, we have tried to make the interaction between SQL Server and Azure as simple as possible, and I'll demo that. So what is Stretch? Stretch database is a feature in SQL Server 2016 that allows you to securely and transparently migrate your cold data from your local network, from your enterprise storage, to Azure. This data, this cold data, historical data, to Azure. But the beauty of it is, the data is still available, it's still online, it's still available. It's a cost-effective way of dealing with cold data. It reduces local storage and maintenance. As I said, your entire table is online and available, and there's no application changes. And of course, security, and we'll talk more about this further in the demo. But of course, security, it's secure. We support all the security features in SQL Server 2016 and Azure. So why did we create Stretch? Well, cold data, historical data. When we talk about cold data, there is in most enterprises, up to 85%, sometimes more, of the data that is actually on their local enterprise storage is cold data. So what is this data? Your day-to-day running of your business. It's anything, any historical data that's generated in your general sort of business operations. So historical data. This is the data that, as you run your business, and you gather information about your users, and you generate your sales orders. You just essentially managing your business. It could be manufacturing, it could be hospitals, could be anything. This data builds up, and it builds up, and it builds up. And again, it could be order history, online, your online order history, sort of company, an online shop, online store. You buy a product, it's hot data. This is your transactional data. You're talking to their system, you're choosing your product, you may be putting in your credit card details. You're going through the process of making your order. You order it, your product gets delivered. Now that record is sitting in the online stores database, it's cold. It's historical now. It was hot when you were generating the order. It was active, it was being dealt with, but now it's cold. So what do you do with this data? In most cases, it sits there. It needs to be moved around because you have to keep backing this up. If the store gets audited, they have to have this data available to be audited. You may never access it, but you might access it maybe once every 6 months, every 3 months. Maybe you want to generate a new order with a particular customer. You want to get that data back. So you've got to keep it around. It's important to you. When you ask your end users, can I delete any of this data? Can I truncate this? In most cases, they'll say no, because not many people know exactly how much data they have and what's out there. So of course they're going to say no. But it's expensive. It's expensive to store this stuff. You need to be continually creative, looking for more and more creative ways to actually manage this data, moving it around, offloading it to tapes. And I'm sure you've all had no problems restoring data from tapes. Just the turnaround time. If your accountant asks you for credit card statements from, say, 5 years back, you go to your bank, you say, look, I'd like those credit card statements. They say, absolutely, no problem. Yeah, we can get you those. It'll be 2 weeks, and it's going to cost you $15. Ah, okay. So, of course, they're going away to wherever they're storing their cold data. They're getting your bank statements, transforming them, and you'll probably receive it in a PDF. So, this stuff is important. It's expensive to store, so you have to be more and more creative. So this is what Stretch will do for you. But before we go into our little demo, what Stretch database is not. Now, when I talk to customers, a lot of times they see Stretch as a backup strategy or just an archival solution. Stretch is much, much more than that. You're still going to be backing up data using Stretch or not. It's just done differently, and we'll go through that. But a lot of archival systems, you're putting the data somewhere, and yes, you're archiving it, but getting it back is not always easy. The beauty of Stretch is, yes, you are archiving, you are putting data remotely so that it's off your local network. But we're giving you the ability, without any changes, without any updates to your normal operations, we're giving you the ability to bring that data back real time. So what I've got here, I'm going to go flip to a demo, and I'm going to show you how Stretch transformed one of our company's businesses, with their business operations, how our hybrid technology transformed their business. So I'm just going to flip to my demo. So, changing my persona. Don't work for Microsoft anymore. Put on my little telephone headset. Now, I work for a company called Wingtips. We're a kind of a tech-savvy travel concierge service. We help people with their business travel. So, just before we kick off with this, most of you, I'm assuming, travel by air to get here. How many of you had trouble? Missed flights, delayed flights, So it's traveling these days is it's kind of a hit or miss. So Wingtips, they've been in the travel industry a short while, but they're kind of tech savvy. It's a very competitive environment, and they've been struggling. They had a lot of disparate systems. It was very expensive for them to run these disparate systems, and they were struggling to compete. But with the help of the Microsoft technology, specifically our hybrid technology, they managed to transform and modernize their system, and it's dramatically improved their clients' experience. So what you guys see here, can you all see that? So what you see here is my new sales dashboard. I previously had to go to multiple places to get all the data I needed. It was a time-consuming process and kind of frustrating for me and my customers. But now I've got all the data and tools I need right here in front of me, so I can make these smarter decisions for my customers and keep them happy, obviously, because happy clients, growing business. One of my top clients, Jamie Campbell, she's just called me, and I'm excited to see what our new system can do for her.
Hey, Anthony. I'm at that conference in Arizona you booked for me last month. An important customer briefing has come up, and I need to be in Quebec the day after tomorrow.
Hey, Jamie. Great to hear from you. Let's see what we can do for you.
You know, my schedule is really tight here, Anthony. Please do your best to make sure I've got a reliable airline. I've also used a lot of my travel budget, so it needs to be in policy as well.
I've got great news for you, Jamie. With our new booking application, I've got all the historical data I need to provide you with the flight with the highest reliability.
As long as this doesn't take too long. I have to say, Anthony, I like working with Wingtips, but your service in the past has been really slow, and I may need to look at another travel service.
Our system is much faster now, Jamie. Now, not only do I get the normal information like seat availability, departure and arrival times, I can also predict when you get to your destination and give you the weather report.
Sounds great. So what is it telling you?
Looks like you have a few flight options. The cheapest with Theta Express, hasn't been looking too reliable lately. But if I look at the next one, the next most expensive, slightly out of your corporate budget, it looks like it's more reliable. Hang on, let me see how they've been doing over the last few weeks.
Wow, that's already so much faster.
Ooh, yeah, looking at Overland Air, although they've been showing as more reliable, recently they've actually been doing much worse. When I look at Theta Express, they've actually been doing much better. I recommend you take the Theta Express flight.
Great, let's book it. Hold on, I'll go grab my corporate card.
No need, Jamie. I've got your card details on file.
You do? That makes me really uncomfortable. When did you start keeping credit card details available for travel agents?
Yeah, our new system is built on technology that keeps our clients' sensitive information secure. And although I can see you have a card on file, I can't actually access it or get access to the details. And the good news is I can give you access to the first-class lounge in Quebec when you get there. And although they can verify it's your card, they also don't have access to the details. Should I go ahead and buy it?
Please do. I'm really impressed, Anthony. Thanks for the help.
It's my pleasure, Jamie. Your flights are booked, and it looks like you should take an umbrella, pack an umbrella. It looks like it's going to be bad weather in Quebec.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So, back at Microsoft. So Jamie's experience, much faster. Thanks. Jamie's experience, much faster. So she was, previously, she was a little bit concerned about how Wingtips were dealing with her business. But, through our new system, with our sort of integrated technologies, she's a happy client, and we're very pleased that she remains a client. Now, of course, what Jamie doesn't see is what's happening on the back end. So to enable us to compete, we're a small company. We don't have unlimited money for unlimited infrastructure. For us, enterprise storage is expensive. We're trying to compete in a very competitive market. So all the data that I use to help Jamie book her flight and choose and book her flight, it's all stretched. So it starts off as hot data. So when we look at the activity history, so if I go back and look at the app, so the activity history, and of course this is just Jamie, but we deal with hundreds of clients. The activity history starts off as hot data as we're talking to Jamie, as we're going through booking her flight. Once she's booked and she's paid for her flight, it's cold data. We don't need it on our network, but we can still query it. We can still see Jamie's activity history. Now, when I was checking Jamie's flight, we used a temporal table for that. So we have a flight feed that comes in and just dumps in flight data into our flight feed table. We don't need to keep this hot. It comes in, we stretch it to Azure. It's cold data. We can still query it, instantly queryable. Now the transaction history. So let's look at, so when we were using her credit card. So let's just look at her, that's Jamie's customer number. So we're querying now the transaction table. So this is where all the credit card transactions are stored. And Jamie was obviously concerned that we had her credit card details on file. Now I'm a sysadmin on this server. Not even I can see this. And of course you all know about always encrypted. Temporal, always encrypted, work perfectly with Stretch database. And in fact, there is a session at 1 p.m. with some of my colleagues that are going to do another deep dive into always encrypted, temporal, and Stretch. But as you can see, it's just ciphertext. Nobody can see that. If I go back to my intelligent app and I look at the payment history, yes, I can see that there are cards on file. I still don't have access to the actual card data, but I have more access than I would have on the server. So whether the data is at rest or in transit, it's always encrypted. Sorry, but the question was?
So once you push it to Azure, it's historical. You need to bring it back for something.
Okay, so the question was, once you push it to Azure, and it's historical, and you need to bring it back. In a normal, if you're wanting to bring that data back and re-stretch it somewhere else or bring it back and not use Stretch anymore, you simply disable Stretch and bring the data back. Now, under normal operating circumstances, you wouldn't need to bring that data back for any reason. It's always online. It's always available. It can just stay in Azure. And we'll go through the kind of the backup and restore scenarios and disable, enable. The idea of Stretch is we want to clear the stuff off your network. And as we talk about how Stretch works, I'll tell you exactly what happens to that data. So the question was, what about the querying of that data? Well, let's face it, the data is remote. So there is a certain amount of latency of returning, of bringing that data back. Now, that is all dependent on the network of the actual infrastructure that's being used. But the idea is that this data is data that you very, very infrequently access, or if you do, a certain amount of latency is acceptable. This is not data that you would choose. This is your transactional data. This is not the hot data that's running your business. This is stuff that you're accepting some level of latency on. So let me head on back to my demo, which is 5. Yes? Okay, so the question was, if you need to bring the data back to query it, are you charged an egress fee to query it and then put it back? Yes. Did I get that right? Okay, so, and we'll talk about querying. So the beauty of Stretch database is you don't need to pull your data back to query it. When you're querying the data, you're querying the normal table. Stretch is smart enough to know whether it's local or remote. What we do is we distribute the query up to Azure. We run the query in Azure, and we send the results back. There is a minimal egress cost, obviously, for those results to come back, but you're not required to pull the data back to query it. You should be able to query it in place on the remote instance. Yes, only. You're only paying. So the question was, we're only paying for those results coming back? Yes, that is correct. So you're only charged for the data coming back. So this question was, what about updating? What do we get charged for updating the data? So you're updating the data on your local instance. So the customer wants to change their flight. They change their flight. You're updating the data on the actual local table. Stretch doesn't care about that record that you're updating. What will happen is when the next batch comes through, it will do the reconciliation and just constantly migrate. And I'll get to the migration portion of it further in the demo. So let's move on to how does it work? Perfect segue. Okay, so let's take a drink. How does Stretch work? So there's a one-to-one mapping between a database that has Stretch enabled and the backend that's created in Azure. Now, a lot of questions come up are, what is that backend? Is it a SQL DB? What is it in the backend? So we've created a brand new service in Azure. It's a SQL Stretch edition, SQL Stretch Database Edition in Azure. It's a very long name. It's our own dedicated backend. So when you enable Stretch on your SQL Server 2016, you enable on the database, we create a database in Azure that's a dedicated Stretch Edition database in Azure. One-to-one mapping, and you can identify as many tables as you want on that local SQL Server to go to that Stretch instance. Now when I say local, it could be a full SQL Server instance as a VM in Azure, or it could be in a physical box in a data center, something. I mean, in my case, under my desk. But it has to be a full SQL Server 2016 instance. So when we do this, you enable Stretch on the database, and I'll be showing you that. We kick off a job that creates, we create a secure connection. You can ask Stretch to deploy a new server for you in the back end. We deploy like a default V12 server. We can ask Stretch to deploy a brand new server for you, or you can have a previously created server that you can just identify that server and provide the credentials. As soon as you create that connection with Azure, we create the database at the back end. If you haven't identified a table to Stretch, it will just create the back end, an empty back end. It'll wait for you to identify a table. You then identify your cold data. We do have a tool that helps you identify the cold data, and actually while you're running, which I'll show you in the demo, while you're actually running the enabling Stretch, running the wizard, we run it over a set of rules. So anything that we consider not, that meets a limitation that doesn't allow us to stretch, we won't allow you to stretch that. And there are limitations. We have them fully documented. The limitations themselves, we're dealing with, it's kind of in future planning, we're knocking off limitations as we go. And we can talk a little bit more about that afterwards. So anyway, as soon as you've promoted as soon as you've created the remote instance, Stretch will, if you've identified data to go, Stretch will immediately start migrating the data. It'll just begin. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to set up a remote instance. You don't have to kick off any sort of migration script. Stretch will just begin migrating automatically. Now, it's a trickle migration, and it's trickle migration for a reason. We want to impact your local resources as little as possible. Now, it's small batch sizes. It's 10,000 rows at the moment. We are looking to increase the batch size or give you the ability to customize the batch size. That's specifically for regions where telecoms are expensive, and you want to choose a really cheap time to actually push through a whole bunch of data. And in this current version, it's small batch sizes. We begin this trickle. Now, while it's trickling, while it's kicked off, your end users are completely unaware of it. It doesn't impact your queries. You're still querying the local table. All access to the data is controlled through the local table. All policies, everything is still controlled through the local table. Your users aren't accessing the data directly in the remote instance. So everything continues to work. Your apps continue to work. Your queries continue to work. You don't have to change any of your apps to suit Stretch database. Yes, question?
All or nothing type thing? You put I only want certain records out of this table to go.
So the question is it all or nothing? Can I identify, instead of identifying an entire table, can I identify specific rows? Yeah. So the question is yes, and I'll demonstrate that as well. So anyway, everything, your apps, your users are unaware, it's completely transparent. They continue working as normal, and your data is just leaving your network. So now when we actually migrate the data to Azure, we're physically removing, after each batch has moved to Azure, and we've reconciled that we know that the data is in Azure, we remove it from your local table. So we're reducing the amount of data that you have locally. Yes, question at the back there.
What happens when my data gets corrupted and I have to go to a point-in-time restore? When I do that, I have to obviously have to disconnect the migration and then set up another one. So there will be another extra charge to get it done, or how does it work?
Okay, so the question, and we'll talk about backup and restore further down. So the question was, what happens if I have to do my data's corrupted and I have to do a point-in-time restore? And point-in-time restore on your local instance, correct? Okay, so, and we'll talk about this further in the backup section, but briefly, Stretch will do a reconciliation of the data. So once you've restored to the particular point in time that you want to, Stretch will do the reconciliation of the data automatically. And you will have the ability, if there is at a point where you have to do some manual reconciliation because there may be something that we cannot reconcile, then obviously you have the ability to do that. And you can make updates to the remote instance. The remote instance is read-only normally, but you have the ability to make updates to the remote instance. But we'll cover that in backup. As we get to the backup and restore, we'll cover that in more detail. As I said, security controls and maintenance remain local. So again, you don't have to set up any special security protocols for your users to access the information. It just remains the same. We have customers who, what they like about Stretch is if they do have an audit, and they have the auditors come in and they want to run an audit over the cold data. It's very simple. They use the normal queries that they would normally do to run an audit. But in this case, the actual DBA can make sure that the queries are just scoped to remote. So they can run an audit on this cold data. You can up the compute on the cold data, and the auditors can just hammer away at that without impacting the local operations because they're just querying remote data. And when they're done, that's it, they're done.
This conversation we're having right now, when you say cold storage, are you talking like a couple months, or like years? What's the time?
So the question is, so when we're talking about cold storage, are you talking about?
See, I was thinking about backups more for building the backup.
Okay. So, I mean, are you talking about quantity of data?
Yeah.
So at the moment, Stretch can support up to 1 petabyte of data. So the backend, so there is no, I mean, and that's probably just going to keep increasing. So we have one customer that has a 16 terabyte table. I'm not sure how, but they have a 16 terabyte table. And in fact, a lot of the times we talk to customers who have discovered things that we're very excited about. And yeah, it's lovely working with them. But yeah, so 16 terabytes, Stretch can handle that. Okay, so where were we? Oh, and then a lot of the questions come up. So what versions of SQL is it available in? The only one it's not really available in is the Linux version. We haven't ported our stuff there yet. But all other versions of SQL Server 2016, it's available. We have a customer who's testing Express with it. So of course you have a table limit size in Express. You can overcome that by using Stretch, because at a certain stage he just migrates the data. So let's go on to the demo. Alrighty. Has anybody kind of gone in and played around with Stretch, kind of installed 2016 one? Nobody? Okay, well, it's going to be boring for you. Okay, so let's go to 8. Alrighty. So let's start with, so we had a question that was, is it all or nothing? Do I move all of the data, or can I select just specific data to go? What I'm going to show you first is all of the data. So this is a kind of a schema where the customer, whatever app is generating the orders, we have an orders table, and as soon as the order has kind of been closed off in the orders table, it goes to the order history table. So in this particular instance, I have this order history table. I am just going to migrate the entire order history table. So very simple. This is just a standard install of SQL Server 2016. We go through the wizard. So you just right-click on the database that you want to enable Stretch on. You go down to Stretch and enable. So this actual machine that I'm working on is literally under my desk. So normal overview screen. So this is the interesting part. So remember I told you about the rules that we run over the data. So there are certain limitations, and this is around kind of computed columns and XML types. We have a set of rules that every time you run Stretch, we analyze your database against this set of rules. And we only allow you to stretch the tables that are actually not going to put you in a state where you can't get out of. You can always go back. We provide guidance. We show you we give you kind of an idea what the issue is. We provide guidance. And if you're looking at a table and you're thinking, well, hang on, I should be able to stretch that, then obviously you can update it and rerun the wizard. We generally look for tables with many, many rows, because that's normally your history table. So that's generally what bubbles up to the top. So I'm just going to stretch one table this time. Now, you can enable Stretch at the table level, so you can right-click on the table and say Enable Stretch, or you can do it at the database level. In both cases, it does enable it on that entire database. The only difference is, if you enable it at the database level, you can identify multiple tables to stretch at one time. Obviously, if you just enable it at the table level, just the one table goes. So off I go. Let me sign into Azure. So I'm going to use phone sign-in stuff. And let's go. So, and there we go. There's the hybrid beauty of Stretch database. I've got SQL Server 2016. Now I'm signing into I've got with an Azure account. I'm just signing into my Azure instance. So I've created I'm going to show you both. I'll show you where you can create your own server. In this instance, I'm going to use just my a server that I've already created, because I'm going to flip to the back end and show you what it looks like on the back end as well. So we'll just wait for this call to come through, because there's 23,000 mobile phones working at the moment. So, oh, it's coming through. Okay.
Thank you for using Microsoft Sign-In Verification. Your sign-in was successfully verified.
Sweet. Okay, so signing into my Azure subscription. It's the normal sort of sign-in, Azure and sign-in window. You've got, it shows you all the regions that you're able to deploy in. In this case, I'm going to go to West US. So here you can create a brand new server if you want. And it takes slightly longer to enable Stretch that way, because obviously we have to create a new server in Azure and then create the back end and then obviously begin the Stretch. Or you can use an existing server. Now, we're talking about authentication. We support Azure Active Directory and federated accounts. So if I had that set up on my Azure server, it would use my current signing credentials and sign me through. So the server I'm going to use is Anvang Demo 16. And sign in. And then I just provide my database master key so that I can encrypt my credentials, secure my credentials. So, IP address. We recommend that you choose a specific IP address range or public IP address range. We're not actually opening up any firewalls on your local network. All we're doing with this is we're actually telling your Azure instance, listen out for communication from this public IP address. So in this instance, I'm just going to use whatever's been allocated to my machine right now, and off we go. So yeah, just basic information of what you've just done, just standard SQL stuff. So right, off we go. So this normally takes about just under 2 minutes, roughly, to enable it. So set the metadata on the database, create the secure connection, and kind of kick off the remote deployment. So while we're doing that, I'm going to go to. I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Is there a way to script this?
Yeah, so the question is there a way to script this? Absolutely. So all of the functionality that's in the wizard, you can do in T-SQL. And in fact, you have more functionality in T-SQL at the moment. We are constantly updating the wizard functionality. But at the moment, T-SQL, there is it's more. There's a little bit more functionality in that. And you'll see that with the predicate. Now, with the predicates, you can make far more complex predicates using T-SQL than you can with the wizard currently. But we're working on that. So all of what I'm doing now can be scripted. So I was going to show you monitoring further on, but what I'll do is I will just show you the monitoring first. So once the database has actually been stretched, you can monitor what's happening. So you can see what was identified as the total eligible cold rows that were identified. You can see what, in this case, there's 0 local, and then what has been moved to Azure. So it tells you what instance you're connecting to, your local instance, the server name, and local database. And in fact, let's go through and actually look at that database while this is working its thing.
So if you run a query on your current data and it doesn't locate it because it's already stretched it, will it automatically go to look at your stretched?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
If you run a query for information on your local storage, hot storage, and some of that's been moved to the cold storage, will it automatically go out to query that?
Yes, it will. So the question was, if you're querying data, you're querying your local table, and you're querying data that has in fact moved to Azure, will it query that data? Yes. So Stretch is smart enough to know whether the data is still local or remote. If the data is not remote, it just won't bother sending a query up to the remote instance, and it'll just query the local.
The Stretch database, do you support other cloud providers?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you support other cloud providers with your Stretch databases?
Other COG providers. Oh, other cloud providers, sorry. At the moment, just Azure.
Okay. Are there plans to support other cloud providers?
It is something that we've discussed, but that's as far as we've got. I don't have any definitive information on that yet. So,
Possible maybe to Stretch database on a local other SQL server, which I host on-prem.
okay, so the question is, can you stretch from local SQL Server to local SQL Server?
This is important.
Yeah.
Data in my environment from the production system to a hot standby, because our SQL servers are not on the
Yeah. Absolutely. So, and of course, the concern there is, well, the reason for wanting this for most of our customers, they're either in defense industry or government. They need to keep their data secure. They aren't quite ready to jump in the cloud, or there is not a government cloud available for them. And then the question is, can we stretch from a local SQL server to another local SQL server? So with the current functionality, no, but we are actually discussing how to implement that, because there are a lot of customer requests for that. And so that is one of our sort of our next steps moving forward.
Can I stretch one to many, meaning regions? So one in the U.S. and then I can stretch it to another Azure instance in the U.S. and then another one in the U.K.
So you want to stretch the same call data to multiple instances. Is that correct?
Could I do that?
There's only a one-to-one mapping. So just to dig into your scenario, what would be your reason for doing that? For redundancy, or
Redundancy could be some legal reason. I don't know. I was wondering if I could do it to 2 different regions.
with the stretch, I've actually never been asked for 2 different regions actually. So this is I think we should talk afterwards. I mean, with the current setup, it is just to a single region, but of course you've got geo restore. So I mean, you can replicate your stretch instance to multiple regions, but actually kicking off stretch to multiple regions from your SQL Server, no, we don't have that functionality yet. We'll talk about availability groups. So we're talking about sort of availability groups. I'll talk about availability groups a little bit further on. And again, in the availability groups, which is, again, fantastic compatible feature with Stretch, there is only one Stretch, actual Stretch backend. And yes, you can replicate. But let's talk about always on once I finish this demo. So okay, we've enabled Stretch on this particular database. I can go here. I can monitor this. So to actually monitor, just go Stretch and monitor. So it fires on, retrieves all my service tier information, shows the region that I'm going to. Now this is purely a monitor. You can pause and resume your migration at any time. You would do that using T-SQL. In fact, just so happens, I created one here. Where the heck is it? So at the moment, if you look at in the wizard, it was showing paused outbound. At least it was going outbound. Let's just see if it's still there. No, wrong one. There we go. So you see it's showing outbound migration. And to pause that, we'll just do that. And I go back to my wizard. And it'll change every 15 seconds that refreshes. So to schedule your actual migration, the idea is that you just leave your migration going. The idea is that it's low cost enough so it shouldn't impact your local resources. You just leave the migration going. To pause and unpause, you would need to run a command and say pause. And of course, you can set up a job to do that without any problem. So there you go. Now it's paused. The migration stopped. And just to unpause it, we just simply flip it around and say outbound. So now let's talk about, I have, and this is the most common scenario, we have customers who, the hot and cold data is all in the same table. It's just one great big table. Hot and cold data is all in that same table. So they want to separate that cold data out and leave the hot data behind. Most common scenario. So this is what we do. So we provide you with a filter function. So I'm going to go down to here. And we'll just right-click over here. Now we're going through the same wizard. And before we do that, I'm just going to see what we've got. So in my predicate, so I'm going to run a predicate on just change my database. So let's just execute that. So on this particular, hang on. Come on. Why is my sales order tracking not there? Well, that'll be why. So while I do so again, I'm going to do this. Choose my normal server. And going demo. Oh. DMK. While we're, let me flip to the back end and show you what it looks like on the back end. So remember I was talking to you about, well, what is the back end? What does it look like on the back end? Is it a SQL DB? What is it? So as I said, it's your own SQL Stretch edition in Azure. The databases themselves, all of it, I've just got, as I said, a standard V12 server, SQL server set up here. The back end itself, when I actually open up my server, all of the databases are kind of prepended with this RDA, Remote Data Archive. And we'll just click on the monitor. And I have the ability to scale it up, scale it down. You can't pause these instances. So the idea with Stretch Database is it just runs. The idea of pausing the database doesn't fit in with how Stretch manages the data. So it just continues to migrate, and you just leave it running. You can up the scale, up and down. And then, of course, if you're running really complex queries, you can up the scale. Talking about queries, the queries themselves is not necessary to manage your queries any differently. You're just querying the local table. So your query plans remain the same. You can update indexes. You can create and drop indexes. It'll be replicated on the remote table. You can it's just normal queries. As I said, it's smart enough to know whether data is local or remote, and you build it. You don't have to make any changes to your normal query functions. So we have, and also with. So let me go. So let's move on to disabling, shall we? That's a pity. So we've been through the back end. As I said, so been through the back end, show you what the back end looks like looks like for Stretch. So what about my data? Is my data secure? So as you saw in the demo, the data itself, through the intelligent app, the Wingtips sales rep could see that the card was on file, had no access to the data. The data was completely encrypted. As I said, we support AAD authentication. Data in motion is secured. Data at rest is secured. If you have TDE enabled on your local instance, you can enable it on your remote instance. Encryption key, very key, very key piece of functionality, remains in the source SQL Server. So that is not available in Azure. So you keep control of the keys. And of course, it supports SQL Server and SQL Azure audits. Backup and restore. So cold data and hot data. The problems of having to manage this massive amount of cold data, looking for all these creative ways to keep it available and accessible to your users, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of resources. It's not just your enterprise, your actual disk space. It's the resources involved in managing this stuff. Now with Stretch Database, your DBAs only have to worry about backing up the hot data. So you've moved your cold data to Azure. In Azure, we take care of the backups and the restores. The hot data, all you need to do is worry about the hot data. So if the hot data is corrupted, you have to restore the hot data. Very simple function. Yes, question? So you can kick off. So who's maintaining it in Azure? So obviously there are guarantees in Azure that we for availability. But as far as in Azure, you can kick off re-indexing jobs on your data in Azure. And any of the sort of backups, you can identify an oops backup in Azure for your point-in-time restore. You can perform all those functions. So DBA only has to worry about the hot data. So the questions come up, okay, what happens when my local server goes down? What do I do? So very simple. You have your hot data backup. You restore it to a new server. Once you've restored it to a new server, you reauthorize the connection to Azure. There is only one instance. There is only one Azure instance of that cold data. You reauthorize that connection, and then Stretch will do, using batch ID, will do a reconciliation of that particular data. We support point-in-time restore, obviously, geo-restore. One of the questions that comes up is, I do actually want to do some work on my apps. I want to test my apps using the actual cold data. How do I do that without impacting my daily operations? Simple. You restore your hot data to a completely different server, and you can do a restore with copy. And we will make another copy of your Azure your Azure data, so you can create this test or dev environment, and you can test against that. So the beauty of Stretch as well is if you have devs coding against a specific API, you don't need to change that API. They can still code against the same API, so it is considerably cheaper. Availability groups. So it just works. If your primary is a Stretch database, there is only going to be one instance of the actual cold data. So you have your primary and secondary. If your primary falls over, the secondary will automatically pick up and authorize its connection with the cold data. So it makes, obviously, seeding of the secondaries much quicker, and you get data savings across multiple replicas. Any questions? Sorry, the question is, for secondary, can we geo-replicate it?
Instead of keeping it in the same location, can we have this in Asia while primary is in US?
So the question was, can we have the replica in a different region?
Yes, we'll still get the same
As long as it's part of the same availability group, you can do that.
For the backup, you mentioned you use SQL VSS for it, get a VSS backup.
So the question,
VSS backup, will it work if you have a stretch data?
for backups, if you have a DSS,
No, VSS.
a VSS backup, and so your scenario would be,
Stretch data.
and you,
Would I still get a consistent backup copy?
so you want to back up your hot data and a full backup of your remote data? Is that
No,
correct?
well, I have a one database and one of the database like stretched.
Mhm.
Now if I QS database, will I get a consistent copy of the database?
You will get a copy of just the hot data.
A hard data.
Yes. So if you're doing a full backup of a particular database and there is a table that is stretched, the only data that you will back up fully will be the hot data that is local. It will not go out and copy the stretch instance.
What about for disaster recovery on the Azure side? So if you're geo-replicating your stretch database,
Mhm.
and you have your DR node, you have a third replica, you have DR node somewhere else, can you fail those over together if you need to? I mean, if your Microsoft data center goes down for some reason and we need to fail over.
So the question is, what happens if it's part of an availability group? So the secondary is part of a region that goes down as well.
So you have a third node, a DR node,
Yeah.
a synchronous node in another region, right?
As long as it's part of the same availability group,
And then
It
you
will-
also need to geo-replicate your Azure SQL though, right?
yes, you would. You would have to do you'd have to do a geo-replica, a point-in-time restore of that particular, whatever backup you have of your Azure data, and reauthorize the connection with that.
Okay, so
That's secondary.
You can reauthorize it to
Yes, you can.
the DR node.
Yes, you can. As long as they're part of the same availability group.
Log backups, would they work also?
I'm s-
Transaction log backups, would it have any effect if you have a stretch data?
The transaction, would the stretch have an effect on the transaction log? So, I mean, the transaction logs will be local. So you wouldn't, they would remain local, so you would still need to back those up. They would still be part of the backup.
The transaction logs grow more stuff with egress.
They will, so, yeah, with the question, will the transaction logs grow? There will be some growth, and it also depends on on the amount of data and what you've got in your system. But we could, if you want, we can talk afterwards. And there will be, again, the session at 1 o'clock. If you want to attend that one, I'll have actually the details up on the screen.
So if you restore your hot data about 1 day back or something, say
Uh-huh.
back from something happens, what about orphan data that might have been posted to the Stretch database?
So the question is, what happens if you restore your hot data at least 1 day back? Stretch will try to do a reconciliation. If it sees, it will try and do reconciliation of the data, obviously. So if it sees that there's data missing, it will make sure that it takes that into account. In some cases, you would have to do a manual identification to make sure you aren't having any replicas, or if you're missing data, fill that in.
Sometimes if you have to roll back to the
Yeah.
point before everything, and you already got transactions out there, you can clean that up. Wasn't sure if it's hey, this is before the timestamp, after the timestamp that you.
Well, we use batch ID. So it should reconcile it using batch ID. I should probably get the...
How does the cleanup process work? Like, for instance, we do sliding window partition tables to delete data, mostly to keep the table size down. But if something like this, it would be nice to keep that data, but it's a very active table, so we can't do normal deletes because it causes locking
Okay.
and things like that. So the background cleanup, like, would we be able to use something like this to just move it and seamlessly keep the table light?
To support your sliding window.
Yeah.
So at the, sliding window, actually, we are looking at functionality to actually automate that. At the moment, you would have to, it's kind of the poor man's sliding window, but yes, it would support that. So that data, you would just stretch that. How are we doing for time? Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left. Let me see what else okay. Now, a lot of customers, so we've have been talking about this. We released with SQL Server 2016. We have had a lot of feedback about Stretch Database and the service in Azure and how much the service costs. So we're looking at this in two ways. One, in the next couple of months, we're going to be releasing a new stretch default. So it's kind of a lower DSU default. At the moment, when you create a stretch database, you create a DS100. So let's flip back to this, and we'll show you our. So the default, whenever you enable stretch on a stretch database, it goes off and it creates a DS100. And that is the lowest entry point, current lowest entry point of a stretch edition in Azure. So we're going to be releasing a DS20 in the next few months. So any default database that you create will go to this new lower entry point. So we're still in sort of test phases, and we'll have more information as that comes out. Are there any questions around that? Let's go back to Surface. Okay, takeaways. Sorry, said I'd bring this up again. With Stretch, we really want to give enterprises the scalability of the cloud. We want to let them be able to use the scalability of the cloud, take all this cold historical data that's sitting on the networks and kind of costing a lot of money. We want to give them the ability to take this data, put it in the cloud, but allow them to still access it, and be able to access it without updating any of their apps, any of their queries, as low cost as possible. So it's very little impact to your local network and very little impact to your end users. So Stretch Database is still, it is the quintessential hybrid product. This is the true first step into the cloud. If you haven't moved to the cloud yet and you're still thinking about how to do it, this is a perfect first step, in our opinion. Yes? Good question. So in a lot of systems, you don't have a primary key and unique key. Well, they have a problem with that. So unique keys, you'll see in the Stretch documentation, we don't currently enforce unique keys. Now, a primary key is a feature that we're working on. We're working to support primary key. The current version of Stretch does not support that, but that is our next. That's the next step for us. And foreign key as well. We're looking at supporting foreign key source as well in the next steps.
I'm showing that where you want to 12:30.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm showing that
Oh, is it at 12:30? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yes. So if you look at the next session, so my colleagues Joe, Borko, and Jakub are going to be doing a session. It's BRK 3151, and yes, it is at 12:30. 12:30, yes. So they'll be doing a deep dive, obviously, in the temporal, always encrypted, and Stretch functionality, and doing a demo thing. Yes, question?
Filter the data and send it to migrate to Stretch database.
Sorry, how do you?
Filter the data and migrate the data to Stretch database.
How do you identify? Filter. Oh, okay. So let's actually quickly do that. If you give me a sec. We're working on that, but currently it's not available in Azure Stack. So if you guys could just give me 1 sec, I just need to restore a database, and then I can show you the filter. Shouldn't take long. It looks like I forgot one of the databases to identify the filter predicate. Are there any other questions while I restore this database? Sure. Yes.
Related question, how do I change the filter here? Say I set it and move the data back to local.
Okay.
I set it up so anything more than a year old goes to Stretch, and I suddenly discover people really want to see 15 months of data.
Yeah. So the question is, so what happens? How do I change the filter once I've stretched the database using the filter predicate? So you can only broaden the scope of the filter. To actually change the filter and actually narrow it potentially, you would need to bring all the data back and re-stretch it using the new predicate. Yes, question.
If I have to update a lot of cloud data, how much time does it going to take?
So if you update,
Lots of rows in the cloud data, which is already coded.
how long? So if you update a whole bunch of rows in the cloud data that is already called, so you're inserting new rows. Is that what you're doing? You've got a whole bunch of data that has been of hot data that.
Uploaded the data.
Yeah.
For something like GA state.
Mhm.
Ideally, I was told that it was for MO. Now, it's already uploaded. It has been there for a week. Now, I want to change it to MO.
Okay.
I write the statement as update statement when state equal to GA equal to MO. How much long is it going to reflect in the cloud? How much time does it take to reflect in the cloud?
So how much time does it take for the updates to reflect in the cloud? I feel I should know that. Let me find out, and I can get you the data on that.
I'll put a testing on your yes.
Okay, fantastic.
So, the local SQL Server communicate with the instance of Azure via TLS one-on-one.
Yep.
How do you, can you use internal certificate? I'm assuming Azure needs to have your copy of the certificate, right? Use the local SQL so they can exchange it
So are you talking about the communication between the Azure and the local server?
and the local server.
So
Can you use local certificate, internal certificate, or you have to buy the assigned certificate?
no, use local internal local certificate. And so we use that. Obviously, you create using your DMK to encrypt those credentials, and we use that to encrypt the connection to Azure. So the data itself is encrypted during transit. Yeah, so if it's unencrypted before in the table, it will be unencrypted when it gets to Azure. If it's encrypted locally, it'll be encrypted again in transit, but then it'll remain encrypted on the remote instance.
How do I know which pricing to get?
It depends on how much data you've got. So we have some guidance in the Azure pricing on the pricing docs online. So if you have 5 terabytes of data or less, 100 DSUs is perfect.
Okay, so the query performance is equal.
Yes. So if you up it, obviously, we charge separately between storage and compute. It's premium storage, and then we charge compute on top of that. So storage is flat rate premium storage. If you up your scale, it goes DS 100, 200, 300, 400, up to 3,000. Obviously, if you scale up, you're scaling up your compute.
Choose to use this over SQL Azure data warehouse?
So the data, the difference between Stretch and those tools, this is for cold data. This is not designed for transactional data. This is not.
I'm talking about data warehouse.
Yep.
Azure data warehouse is also kind of cold data where we are only doing select.
Yeah.
So select and stretch also we are putting it in a cold data. Both can be complementary each other.
Yes, it is.
90% of my data in stretch. Then both are in the select possibility, right?
So here I'm just doing the filter. But yes, so the difference, SQL data warehouse, that is in the cloud. It's a full. You'd have to get the data in there. You'd have to load the data in there. So I'm going to be moving 117,000 rows here. Obviously, Stretch they're joined between on-prem and local, and this is not data that you're performing, deep sort of data warehouse analysis on. That wouldn't be the type of data that you would want to put in there. So
I have the 1 terabyte of data, 1 terabyte of data. I can choose to use in Azure data warehouse or in the stretch, right?
Yes, you could, but you wouldn't. But the thing is, with a data warehouse, you would have to physically move it to the data warehouse, and you would have to update your whatever apps or queries that you're using to access that data to now access the data warehouse. If you're using Stretch, nothing changes. You just move the data, and nothing changes.
How is the performance difference between Azure Warehouse and
Well, is that possible to get a question as well? Because you are presenting and I want to ask.
Yeah, totally. So I can. I'm part of the DW growth team. I can come just afterwards. We can, if we go down to the booth, we can hook you up with exactly the right people to talk to.
I will ping you.
Yeah.
Even otherwise, I have to send a hi on the link. You should be getting it. Skype
Okay.
access. Otherwise,
Awesome. But I'll be down at the booth, the data warehouse booth, just after this. Sorry.
Can't make support the memory is available.
You made
So,
you made a filter.
yes.
Starting the 1st of January 2014. What does that mean?
All data that has a date that is older than 1/1/2014 is going to be stretched.
Updated, selected, or is it just
Anything, yeah. So anything that has been in that row, that row was inserted anytime earlier than 1/1/2014, it's going to move. Yes, so, but not with the actual wizard. So in T-SQL you can do far more complex queries. So you can do if the particular row is of this date and the state of it is closed, for example, or it is between this date and this date, 30 days from today, you can make more complex predicates that way. And then anything, if you did 30 days from today, so anything over the last 30 days, I've identified that as cold data, it will move it.
insert row?
Yeah.
And then there's a timestamp.
Yeah.
So but there are a lot of people which are only selecting data to select from.
Yeah.
Is that also updating the timestamp for this particular filter? Because, well, you do a lot of running.
Yeah.
There are always a lot of selects, and select when they are removed, it will slow up the system. And in case of a 90 terabyte database, it will cost a lot of bandwidth. So is it just inserted or is it selected?
So it would be inserted.
Dynamically move the data to Stretch, or we have to have a job that moves the data?
It dynamically moves it. So once you enable it, the migration function just begins working.
Let's say like I have enabled it, I have given the filter as well, and it dynamically moves like 1 month old data.
Yep. It will, yes.
How often? Anthony,
Sorry.
you brush me off too many
Sorry.
times already.
Sorry.
You remember who I am?
Oh, yes.
Where's
My
my
fault.
test account?
I will give it to you right afterwards.
Does this actually support in memory table?
Not yet.